Zeno Clash is a first-person fighting game, for lack of a better term. It was released in 2009 and was the debut title for indie studio Ace Team, and you can tell they were still getting their bearings. It's got some rough edges here and there, a simple story, and a really short playtime. Despite that though, this game is brought up often in cult classic conversations, mainly for its innovative combat mechanics and surreal art direction, so let's get into it. The game opens with Gat, who just killed Father Mother, a bird-like creature, who is parent to Gat and his many siblings. Those siblings are understandably upset and start hunting Gat down as he and his friend Deirdre flee their home city of Halston. The story is told almost entirely through cutscenes, which also serve to set up the new arena where you'll be having your next combat encounter. It's a strictly linear game with no exploration, just here's a cutscene, fight some creatures, repeat. It's simple, but works fine for the short duration of the game. The main draw of the story is the mystery of why Gat killed Father Mother, but most of the cutscenes have nothing to do with that. In fact, most of the story is just lore building for the game's world. Still, the world itself is so curious that I didn't really mind, and the game teases that central question of Gat's motivations effectively to string you along for the ride. While we're here, I have to bring up the voice acting. It's pretty bad at times.
Gat, I don't know why you did it. Father Mother's children are already coming. Are you listening? Gat!
If you stay with me, they might hunt you down too.
I know.
There he is! We'll eat your butter and toughen your skull!
You have a lot of stuff, eh? What are you carrying? I think you've got something better than that. Hand it over. You're dead. Yeah.
It never bothered me as much as it seems to have bothered some other people. The best way I could describe it is that it just sounds unrehearsed. There's not a lot of confidence in the delivery, and sometimes they're stumbling over their words. But it's not anywhere near as bad as, say, English voice acting for JRPGs.
All by yourself, yes? That is hard.
I am captain of the Amazon Guard. I am quite proficient with a lance or spear.
Yes, we will work well together.
It is rough, but at least I didn't die from secondhand embarrassment. As for the rest of the audio, the music in this game is pretty solid. It's generally got this orchestral, eerie vibe and fits the setting well. The best of the tracks are atmospheric and immersive, and even the worst tracks are really just inoffensive and stay out the way. Anyways, the story, the music, none of that is really why this game gets brought up today. For that, we look at the combat. I mentioned this was a first-person fighting game, but more specifically, this is unarmed melee combat, and that's what makes it so special. Even to this day, there aren't too many games like this around. Most other first-person melee combat games are focused around weapons, and if a game has unarmed combat at all, it's maybe a punch, a heavy punch, maybe a kick. This one takes it a few steps further and is by far the most thorough implementation of first-person unarmed combat out there. So here's how it works. You have a punch and a heavy punch that you string together for 3-punch combos, and that's actually kind of it for strikes you initiate. Instead, the real meat of the gameplay is in the counterattacks. You get a dodge and a block, and timing those perfectly allows you to counter for a lot of damage. At its peak, Zeno Clash is really about reading enemy telegraphs, memorizing movesets, and your reaction time. The game incentivizes you toward this gameplay by way of the stamina bar. When an enemy blocks your strike, you lose stamina very quickly, and the same occurs when you block their strikes. So you can't just mindlessly wail on an enemy that's shelled up. You can break their guard with a heavy attack, but you'll be rewarded with much higher damage output if you can strike while their guard is down or hit them with a counter. You can also daze an enemy after enough strikes, and this opens them up to be thrown and ragdolled. A regular strike against a dazed enemy will uppercut them, sending their body flying, or you can walk into a dazed enemy to grab and throw them. This is the second best part of the gameplay because ragdolled enemies will knock down other enemies in their path. In this game, you're almost always outnumbered, so for me this introduced a little side objective in every encounter. How could I best position myself to knock over all these other enemies? There's also an attack you can do while running, which helps you initiate, and a big wind-up punch if you do a heavy punch while walking backwards. A finisher move, basically. All of these elements add up to a pretty solid foundation for combat, and it often does feel like a fighting game. The game really tries to drive this point home with these versus screens between each encounter and health bars at the top of the screen. You've probably noticed that the game also uses a lock-on system for combat. The game actually forces you to use it. If you start fighting an enemy, it automatically locks onto them. I think it works though, it never got in the way, and it reinforced this hand-to-hand combat vibe, and sidestepping to get better positioning around the enemies felt natural. Like I mentioned earlier, you're almost always outnumbered, so positioning is important. The game is remarkably fair when it comes to this though. Everyone is pretty tanky and does decent damage, so it wouldn't really work if 3 enemies ganged up on you at once. Instead, they'll be pretty reserved, mostly taking turns fighting you, typically waiting until you've knocked down their friend before swooping in. They'll also grab a ranged weapon and shoot from afar, but this is pretty fair too. The enemies try avoiding hitting each other, so if you put an enemy between you and the guy trying to shoot you, they'll hold their fire. It's kind of goofy, but most of the enemies will also give you ample warning before they pull the trigger as well.
Gonna fire!
The sound design in this game is actually really effective in this respect. You'll hear enemies long before they attack you, which is important for a game that's designed around locking onto one target at a time. So this is all mostly good so far, but unfortunately what's lacking here is enemy variety. You do meet a lot of different models of enemies with slightly different movesets, but none of them demand you to use any of the fight kit I just described to you. Toward the second half of the game, I found that I could just run at an enemy, punch them 6 times before they could even hit me, which dazed them, and then I could grab and knee them, and then kick their body around. This worked almost every single time, and it just got so stale. I know a lot of people will balk at this and say, well, you just ruined the experience for yourself by exploiting the combat system. And sure, there's merit to that argument. I certainly could have chosen to use all of those other abilities that I mentioned at any moment. The issue for me though is that this is a game with nothing else in terms of gameplay. This is pretty much it. This is the main point of the whole game. There are no unlockables, no skills, no levels, no meta progression. It's just this combat kit right here. So in a game like this, my expectation is for that core gameplay loop to be locked tight. Imagine if there were enemies that you had to parry and block to stagger them before you could hurt them. Or maybe they have a shield and that's the only way to break through. Or imagine you had to dodge an enemy to get around to their backside and that was their weak point. This game doesn't really offer any reason to use any of your kit. There's just so much untapped potential here. Speaking of gameplay shortcomings, let's talk about the weapons. They're pretty bad. First, the ranged weapons. At various points you have access to akimbo pistols, a musket, a crossbow, and a grenade launcher. And you're kind of forced to use these to clear the weaker enemies that swarm around you sometimes. The problem is there's just not much meat to the gunplay. The dual pistols feel like shooting BB guns, and maybe this is nitpicky, but the reload animation really threw me off. Why would cracking my guns in half reload them? To be fair, the musket does feel weighty and powerful, and the crossbow thing is serviceable, but there weren't a lot of opportunities to use them effectively. They're too weak for the stronger enemies, so they're clearly intended for the smaller, weaker ones, but those guys don't do anything other than run straight at you or stop a few meters away for a ranged attack. The ammo is unlimited too, so there's just no challenge here. Even calling this target practice would be generous. The grenade launcher actually does do big damage, but again, you don't get many chances to use this effectively either. And besides, it's not any more exciting, it's just a projectile with an arc. There's also a standard grenade, but it has a long detonation time and enemies run away from it, so it's mostly useless. There are melee weapons too, but these are even worse in my opinion. There are big enemies that can only be damaged by using these, but it's so clunky. You can do a standard attack or a heavy attack, and that's it. But if you're slightly too close to the enemy, your attacks just bounce right off them. The bigger issue is how repetitive it is. The fastest way to kill the big guys is to charge up a heavy attack, which dazes them, then you knock them down. And then while they're getting up, you can time it so that your next heavy attack hits them right as they stand, and then you just rinse and repeat for 4 or 5 blows and you're done. It's just a bit too repetitive, same with the gunplay sections and eventually the unarmed combat as well, unfortunately. That got a bit long-winded, let's move on to something else. The graphics. Honestly, the models have aged really well, but the lighting holds it back a bit. Sometimes things just feel a little bit too bright, the shadows have no depth, a lack of contrast, I would say. In a blog post, one of the devs revealed that due to how their modeling software worked with the game engine, they had to have lighting baked onto the models themselves in addition to the light source already in the game scene. This meant that if a light source in one scene moved, all of the models had to be redone as well. So when they realized the scene was poorly lit, they had to choose, add on a ton of work or just live with it. Other than the few really noticeably badly lit areas though, the game still holds up great thanks in part to the art direction. It's really something else. It's sometimes disturbing, sometimes silly, but always unique and absurd. In a 2009 Rock Paper Shotgun interview, the devs mentioned their inspirations. One was Hieronymus Bosch, and the other was John Blanche, who was notably the art director for Games Workshop and helped set the tone for the Warhammer and Warhammer 40k aesthetic that we know today. The art still endures so strongly today because the devs really went for an original fantasy game, not one predicated on the already established tropes of the genre. No dragons, elves, or magical spells here, just oddities. Because it's so different from anything out there, it also gets away with an aesthetic that is both surreal and grounded. What I mean is that you run into so much you don't understand, but the game presents it with such little fanfare that all you can do is shrug and nod along. Like, why is this hookah made of limbs and snakes? Why is this giant whale here? What the hell is this thing? At no point in the game did I think, well, this is ridiculous. The game never explains anything about the environment, so all you can do is accept it at face value. And there's so much detail too, even in areas where you barely spend any time in. It almost feels like a waste. Often I would pass by a unique object or structure that I would barely see anywhere else in the game. I wondered, why would someone go through the trouble to put this here? I think maybe it was their intention from the start, because as it turns out, when Ace Team put this game together, the 7-person team only had one programmer, with the rest being artists and designers. I think it was a smart move too, because as I said earlier, this is a linear game with no exploration, but it really doesn't feel that way. Throughout the game, you bounce from one completely bizarre locale to another, and even though you barely spend 20 minutes in each of these areas, they're all so different that it really paints a picture of a massive world. In a way, that's really the story of this whole game and where the devs' priorities were. The core combat mechanics are solid, but outside of that, the gameplay is pretty lackluster. Meanwhile, the game is bursting at the seams with art that the 5-hour playtime can hardly contain it. It makes for a very lopsided experience, and that is ultimately, I think, the main divisive point for fans and critics of the game. Alright, so I think I'm going to get into spoilers now, but this shouldn't take too long. If you don't want to know though, skip to here. Okay, so throughout the game, Gat reveals in flashbacks that before killing Father Mother, he spent the past month hanging out with the Corporate of the Free, who are basically amoral forest lunatics. One of them, Metamog, teaches you how to fight, and you have a showdown with him, which Metamog wins, but then he kills himself with a bomb, because that is how the Corporate do. Gat returns to Halston and decides to look more into Father Mother's connection to a local gang, the Northern Gate Gang, but Father Mother reacts poorly to this and banishes him from the city, telling everyone to treat him as a Corvid, as basically a crazy person. Meanwhile, in the present day, Gat and Deirdre reach the literal end of the world where they accidentally free Golem, an omniscient, apparently friendly being. Is that a Rubik's Cube? Anyways, Golem offers to go back to Halston with Gat and Deirdre to help them confront what they're running from. On the way to Halston, the trio find a woman whose son has turned into a pig. She's surprisingly chill about it, actually. Here, a mercenary Gat siblings hired almost kills him. Golem saves the day, but then gets wounded in the process, which wounds everyone else at the same time. I don't know, they don't really address this. Anyways, they return to Halston and surprise, Father Mother lives. In the final showdown, Golem saves the day again by breaking his and subsequently everyone else's fingers at the same time. But even to the last minute, Gat refuses to reveal what horrible secret he's learned about Father Mother that led to all this in the first place. Fortunately, Golem has her back here. Turns out, Father Mother is a biologically male creature incapable of birth. He's been stealing babies across the land and raising them as his own. Why? Who knows? They don't get into it. Gat accidentally learns this after returning from the Corvids, and the rest you know. The game ends on some cryptic dialogue from Golem implying some problems on a grander scale happening in the world. He fiddles with his Rubik's Cube, the credits roll with some other creature that somewhat resembles Golem, and then that's it. So you learn the big secret, but really you end up with more questions than answers. It seems like it's more of a setup for the sequel than anything else, but I did enjoy the mystique of it all. It did leave me wanting more. Whew, so that's it. The video ended up being a lot longer than I intended, and I think that's a testament to how much the combat and the art direction stands out even still in this game. I wouldn't really recommend this to anyone for the plot, but the art and gameplay can be worth it if you're looking for something unique in either area. Just remember that this is a short game. There is a challenge mode where you can hop around from arena to arena just going through encounters, which you could theoretically do for many hours, but at least for me, by the time I finished the game, the combat alone wasn't enough to really keep me going. If you want to pick this game up, it's only $10 on Steam right now, but it goes on sale all the time for under $3. There's also the Ultimate Edition, which was only released on the Xbox 360 and has a few more melee moves, weapons, and even a co-op mode. There's also that sequel I mentioned, Zeno Clash 2, which I'll cover eventually, but there are some other games I want to hit first, so it might be a while. Oh, and I should mention that Ace Team isn't done with this world yet. Clash Artifacts of Chaos is set to release February of next year, and it's looking to be another brawler set in the same world, although it'll be in third person this time. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'm fresh to game reviews, and this one took me forever, so I'm hoping to get another one done, I don't know, within a month or so. Hope to see you there.
Gonna fire!
Firing!
Shooting! Firing ray gun! Get out of there! I'm gonna fire! I'm gonna shoot now!
Firing!
I'm gonna shoot you! I'm gonna fire!
Fire!
Firing!
Firing! Fire!
I'm gonna shoot!
Shooting fire! Shooting bad!
Gotta shoot ya!